Let's just go briefly through some thoughts from the book by Augustine, this latter section of his book on Christian teaching. One of the things Augustine notices is that there's a danger of forgetting what one has to say while working out a clever way to say it. And I think one of the things that Augustine might be getting at here is when people are in positions where they're speaking a lot, sometimes there's a tendency to be more interested in promoting the self rather than in promoting whatever idea or whatever knowledge one is trying to get across. When I get in front of this group, I want to come across as very clever. I want to come across as very dynamic. If that becomes the priority, rather than I have something important to convey and I want to convey this important thing, well, Augustine says that there's a danger in that, and so this is something to be aware of. Related to it is this quote here: "The speaker who is awash with the kind of eloquence that is not wise is particularly dangerous because audiences actually enjoy listening to such a person." So we're speaking of a good speaker, a dynamic speaker, something like that. And the listeners reckon that somebody who is heard to speak eloquently must also be speaking the truth. Well, there's danger in this, and I think we can reflect on the political culture of our country, not just now, but in recent times, and think about people who acquired some degree of influence, not necessarily because they had anything to say, but because they just said things well. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of seeing how this works. I remember being in a meeting once where a person spoke with great eloquence. But then after the meeting, I wondered, well, but what did the person actually say? And I couldn't remember anything that the person had actually said. I do remember being impressed by how fluid his talk was, but I couldn't actually remember anything that he said. And so that's something to watch out for, the problem of style over substance. Augustine says that good speakers will endeavor first and foremost to make themselves understood and ensure by means of the greatest possible clarity that only the slow fail to understand. Well, that last bit, of course, we would reword these days. It does sound a little insensitive, but Augustine's basic point is that we need to put a lot of effort into trying to be clear. Now, we know from life experience that this isn't always going to work. It's not possible always to convey exactly what we mean, and we can't really control what other people hear. We can try as hard as we can to be clear, but we can't control what other people hear. So we understand that perfection in this regard is not possible. But I think this is worth paying attention to, the importance of clarity in speaking, in writing, being clear, not taking up other people's time unnecessarily. As it says there in the yellow, put yourself in the audience's place. If you're teaching, if you're giving a presentation at work, I think even if you're sending an email, will what I want to say and the way I plan to say it make sense to them? Well, you can't know the answer to that for certain because you're not that person. But, we can work toward this, work toward greater clarity. It certainly is a good way to spend our time. This is sort of an obvious point, but I think it's a useful point. A speaker who labors things already learned is a bore. In other words, don't waste people's time stating obvious things as if they were great insights. I don't know about you, but I have found myself often in circumstances where people are spending time saying things and talking about things that perhaps can be referenced quickly, but then we can move on because, everybody knows this, right? The point that's being made is obvious. We don't, literacy is a good thing. I think everybody agrees with that. I'm not sure that we need a lengthy discussion on that point. I think everyone agrees that literacy is a good thing, for example. So let's make that obvious point and then move on. So I wouldn't say this is a profound insight, but it's a worthwhile one. The person who is trustworthy in small matters is trustworthy in important ones too. That's a reference to a point made in the Gospels. Augustine says, then a small matter is small, But to be trustworthy in a small matter is something important. I think this is a tremendous insight. Tremendous insight. The Gospels, of course, make this point. If you're faithful in small things, then you're more likely to be faithful in big things. Sometimes people make the mistake of thinking, well, the little things are little things. They don't really matter. When the big thing comes, then I'll really nail it. But the Gospels, like Aristotle, like St. Augustine, they say no, we really need to practice trying to do well in the things that we do, even the seemingly small things, because the more practice we get working at doing well, then when the big things come, we'll be better positioned to do well. And so the thought that I've added here in the yellow is aim to do well at whatever involves the consumption of other people's time. If we're asking people to listen to us for some reason, if we're asking people to read an email that we're writing, if in some way we're making a claim on other people's time, then it just seems that the moral thing to do is to make that time consumption worth it. Now again, you can't ensure this. I mean, you could put your heart into something, presenting something, thinking about it, trying to convey it in the best possible way, and people may still walk away and say, that wasn't for me. I don't think that was a good use of my time. But insofar as the power lies within us for that not to happen, then obviously it's in our interest to do that. We don't like it when people trample on our time. We don't like it when people consume our time. We don't like it when we feel like our time has been consumed, but we don't have much to show for it. And our time has been consumed because of demands other people have placed on us, asking us to listen to things, asking us to read things, etc. Well, then we want to follow the golden rule and treat others as we want to be treated. When we make demands on others, then we want to the extent we can, we want to make sure that the time consumption we're asking for is worth it, that at least we're thinking about it. We recognize that we're making demands on other people's time. Well, these are, I think these are useful insights from Augustine. This is a very useful one, and this is the last one we'll look at. Augustine says, more important than any amount of grandeur of style, more important than any amount of grandeur of style, to those of us who seek to be listened to with obedience, is the life of the observer. More important than grandeur, more important than our cleverness, more important than our eloquence, more important than our passion, is the life we actually live. That speaks. And Augustine goes on to make the point, that here in the early church in the 400s, Augustine says we have a lot of great speakers, we have a lot of great preachers. But sometimes the great speeches, sometimes the great sermons do not correspond with greatly lived lives. And what we need in the Christian church, what we need in society, are people who are thinking about their lives and the quality of their lives. And so I think this is a tremendous insight from Aristotle. I think we've all seen it. We can all think of examples of people who had no problem saying good things, of people who had no problem speaking with eloquence about ethics and justice. But then we find out that in their own lives there was corruption. In their own lives there was degradation. In their own lives they're trampling on other people. And there's a disconnect between word and deed. And so Augustine encourages us to think about our lives as a message. What we say, those are messages. We speak messages continually. Our life is also a message. What does our life say? Okay, well, with that background, then we'll move toward working through some important speeches by some important leaders. We'll see you. Bye.